Another year, another highly anticipated IP movie that people are going to complain that the critics are being too hard on. Where the easiest defense is, well, at least it's better than the last one, technically. For the most part, the Garfield movie is pretty much what I expected it to be. A fairly standard family animated film. That does all of the things I expect a standard family animated film to do. Foremost, that it has its fun, expressive, and snappy animation, though of course I would always opt for it being just a little bit more 2D, especially if that's the source material. Basically that it has all the pluses of an Illumination film, including the cute factor. Yeah, the minute that trailer showed us Kitten Garfield, its fate was set. This movie was gonna make $500 million no matter how the rest of it turned out. But it also feels like a script that someone actually spent more than one draft on. Not in that it's a radically original story, because it certainly isn't that. I just mean practical things like setup and pacing are a little bit more polished. And its comedy is mostly functional, though every once in a while they do have an Illumination special, aka a joke that goes on for way too long, like its Acorn Bluetooth joke. Otherwise, this movie is one that I would fairly easily forget about, with really only one significant prevailing thought, which is how much this movie just doesn't feel very much like Garfield. And no, none of that has to do with the fact that he's being voiced by Pratt, who, as expected, does a perfectly adequate job, but it's not like anyone else with that cadence couldn't have done just as well, and Pratt himself has done way better in pretty much every single other role he's ever been in. But that's not really the point. It was never about whether or not he was the right person for the job, it was just that he happened to be trending at the time of casting. For one, turning this into a heist or action-adventure is quite a departure from Garfield's home-based shenanigans. But more so, I don't understand when Garfield has built an established, reliable cast over the years, that this opts to use none and instead gets a completely new cast. Especially this long-lost father subplot, which has never been a thing in Garfield lore ever. Almost makes me think like, did you pick the celebrity cast first and then build characters around them? And while Garfield getting pulled along begrudgingly into doing something he doesn't want to do is exactly his thing, it seems like the long-lost father angle was both to give Garfield a character that he can communicate and interact with, because working within the communicative restraints of John and Odie was too difficult to write around for people not used to it, and came with a built-in temperamental dynamic that they could just jump into without needing to establish any groundwork, and came with a foregone emotional conclusion, but also means that Garfield is a lot more vocal and aggressive rather than detached and resigned. So even the character doesn't quite feel like Garfield. So the effect is that this feels like a completely original film that would have been exactly the same if it had an original protagonist, only to have Garfield's skin stretched over it. Which, the more I say it out loud, feels like what might have actually happened given how terrified Hollywood is of things being original. Now, as I said, the movie is fine, I'm not exceedingly mad at it or anything, but I'm also not particularly compelled or moved by it. I was a big collector of Garfield comics, like, a decade and a half ago. I liked the Garfield and Friends show back in the day, and I really liked its Christmas special. So I'm not devoted to this franchise, but I am connected to it. So I can't pretend that I'm not at least a little underwhelmed by it, even if I didn't really expect it to be all that great. And Garfield's dad, whoever his name is, feels like the kind of character created by Close Encounters era Steven Spielberg. My daddy had to leave me, but he still loves me. Which of course alludes to maybe the biggest betrayal of Garfield's character, which is that he hardly ever disrespects or mocks John. Though of course that element is missing from this movie because Garfield and John barely interact in this movie after the first 10 minutes. But I can also see a situation where they saw how much Garfield's online reputation and in memes, at least according to that one Super Eye Patch Wolf video, are so often based around how Garfield, being his self-absorbed and insulting self, is gradually decaying John's will to live. And so, giving him the Lost Kitten backstory, it certainly would make classic Garfield feel so much worse if he still treated John now with that same level of disdain, so now there's this appreciative kinship. Like, right at the beginning, there's this shot of him tucking John into bed with his teddy bear? That's adorable, and very not Garfield. Now, I know that there are some people who have gotten tired of the perpetually negative Garfield, so likely would gladly take one where he was a little mellower to both John and Odie. I wouldn't mind that. Arguably, the problem with Bill Murray's movies is that he was too mean-spirited and not upbeat and animated enough. Which, yeah, happens when it's live action. He is still a comic character, after all. whereas this movie makes him too animated and doesn't make him sarcastic enough. So my real big problem is really just with them completely sidelining John. And Odie is about as good as a silent sidekick as anyone has ever been. He's really funny and he's really cute, but it's also still pretty easy to forget that he's even there. The Garfield comic is the dynamic between John and Garfield, and it just isn't here. So like a lot of remakes, I could have lived with the changes, but I am less thrilled with the way that they did it. But whatever, the movie is passable, I just don't care for it much. And automatically assume that classic Garfield would have made me care more, but maybe not. Now, I don't know how many of you are that invested in classic sardonic Garfield or how this movie will hit with people, but it certainly has been a trend with people remarking about how much remakes are obsessed with preserving characters' likability when the result is often losing their initial intrigue. Certainly was the case with Avatar. But then, as long as the animation is better than the Garfield show, I don't imagine too many people will really fight it. I like the beginning montage, that's pretty much it, and the rest of it is just another animated family movie.